Hi everyone, this is going to be a reply to PhilosophyTube's video titled Why the Left Will Win, and right off the back I should tell you that I'm also in the opinion that the left will win, at least in the West, although myself I am on the cultural right and I would say that the left has already won and will likely continue to win even further if the cultural shift will not be reversed. And if you want to understand why it is happening and if this video was not enough for you, then I highly recommend you to watch my other video that I will link in the description down below. And although it upsets some of my fellow subscribers, one can be more optimistic if they have seen the last minute of that video. Now, enough with self-advertisement, let's get into the matter of this, and the matter of this is as precise as always, a response to some lefty. Right off the back I should tell you something that PhilosophyTube did not specify in his video. It's incredible Eurocentrism in which he only looks at the left's image in the West, time to time rambling about surprise not really a surprise white supremacists, like they're even a political force outside of 4chan.
White supremacists, the loyal white knights of the KKK. Very, very right-wing white supremacy. So the white supremacist has to posit this additional ridiculous conspiracy theory about the world secretly being run by Jews in an attempt to keep white people down. Even Hitler had a mother, even Adolf had a mother.
So we won't be talking about South Africa, the Middle East, Israel, China, South America, Eastern Europe, Russia, or other countries whose existence would go against his narrative. But apart from that, his video did have some resemblance of value. He has correctly identified the definition of the communities of strength that I will even leave for this video.
It's when you say to somebody, you're in my political team because you can do something, because you're strong, because you're fast, intelligent, because you speak the same language as me, because you have the potential for greatness in you, because of your heritage or your genes or whatever. That's why we're together, because we're strong in the same way, and if people want to be a part of our community, then they have to also be strong in that way.
Before he identified the communities of vulnerability that he has correlated with the left, but has misinterpreted their definition to suit his agenda.
Where we say to somebody, you're on our team, not because of what you can do or because you can work hard or speak English or anything like that, but because we both need something. We both need healthcare, shelter, justice, time off from work, to fall in love with someone without being afraid that we'll be discriminated against because of who it is that sweeps us off our feet.
He failed at presenting the actual definition of the community of vulnerability that you can see on your screen, and instead jumped on asserting that the left is for cooperation and finding utilitarian approaches that would benefit everyone, misrepresenting the entire concept of community of vulnerability that actually is mostly applied to, surprise surprise, risk management than political discourses. But I guess he was getting this from a book that he was reading made by a feminist interdisciplinary author that was inserting her own little interpretation of communities of vulnerability that was rather prescriptive as always. So no wonder PhilosophyTube was incorrect. So I guess that was pretty funny. However, I would think of the West's left as the community of weakness, because of the social values that they cherish happen to increase weakness overall. But this is just me.
But okay, there are these two different kinds of communities of strength and communities of vulnerability. Why do I think communities of vulnerability are ultimately going to win out? Because of the power of shame.
I actually thought he would make an honest point as to how the left would socially shame people who are in favor of communities of strength, and by that would secure ultimate subordination of the right, because this seems to be the most popular force that drives people on the left these days, their association with the social hierarchy, that I will ramble about in a bit. Here's an article from Maclean's by David Muscorp, in which he openly advocates for socially shaming people that leftists would identify to be in favor of communities of strength. Here, take a closer look at this sample, and I quote, "In the United States, Trump is the ultimate example of a shameless politician. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, with his Supreme Court double standards and blind devotion to his dear leader, is another. Former President Bill Clinton is one more. In Canada, Rob Ford might be our contemporary shameless nadir. His brother, Doug Ford, now Premier of Ontario, isn't quite as bad, but shares a certain affinity for pushing boundaries." You don't want that, do you? There are certain topics you better never discuss in politics unless you want them to be normalized, do you? Guys like that are dangerous. They break the system. In a democracy, shameless is a threat to forbearance, which means that it's a threat to democracy itself. Indeed, political scientists and observers talk about this quality of restraint as one of the soft guardrails of self-government. Once the guardians go, as they have started to in the US, you're in trouble. Is it just me, or you're also getting very totalitarian vibes from reading this fuck? Quite ironically though, instead of taking about the usefulness of cancel culture to the left and socially stigmatizing people that are in favor of communities of strength, PhilosophyTube actually went to argue the opposite, that I actually think he has some sort of a point on, because people are generally ashamed of their vulnerabilities, and to an extent, communities of strength tend to stigmatize the weak, which are in turn pushed to the left. However, the left is not an inclusive political family that would bring people together, as he argued later. Far from it. They are constantly having in-group conflicts and purity tests that makes them less inclusive compared to the cultural right. The right today is different than the right of McCarthyism era. They are the people who embrace free thinkers and generally have little to none in fighting because they care more for what unites them than what separates them. Unlike the cultural left that is constantly obsessed with dissecting identities and putting them against each other.
People are still going to be vulnerable, and they're still going to be drawn to ideologies that say, hey, that's okay. That's actually why punching Nazis, whatever you think of it morally and practically as a tactic, is ideologically quite a clever move, because nothing exposes the lie of somebody crowing about how they're the super strong master race faster than getting their ass handed to them.
Punching Nazis? Why? I thought communities of vulnerability would welcome all socially vulnerable people, but I guess there are different kinds of vulnerabilities. Some are just not going to be accepted. That's fine.
Part 2. Victimhood. It's I love you so long as you reflect me. It's the love of the self, narcissism really, projected outwards. It's not the kind of love that says, I love you, vulnerabilities and all.
I love you as long as you reflect me. I genuinely think that this statement accurately represents reality, and not just the people who are on the right, but all people, including people on the left. Here are prime examples of that. Worker unions that love each other more than their boss. Then, according to Public Religion Research Institute, the average black person has just 8 white friends out of 100, while the average white person has 91 white friends out of 100. Even in dating, contrary to the popular myth, people pick those who are most similar to them or someone who looks familiar to them. It has been established a long time ago that people are drawn to people that are similar to them, and there's an evolutionary reason behind it, which I'm not getting into now. Instead, I will say that leftists remain social animals that are shaped by evolution just as the right. Don't pretend like they will love people no matter what. In fact, the left is the most purest political ideology, to the point in which 45% of Democrats would not let their children marry a Republican. And I don't even want to get to my personal series of interaction with lefties, because you have your own experience in interacting with them that you can share with other people, and if you are a lefty and don't believe in what I say and think that they're really open-minded, then try to say to them something quote-unquote reactionary and listen to their response. So let's not talk about openness here. The left is clearly not the ones who will like the other more than their own. Well, apart from race of course, but that is only true for white leftists, because other leftists actually are racially conscious while being on the left, not to mention how they benefit from white leftists who have a negative racial bias. Anyways, after that he made a very laughable claim that the elite is supposedly people like Tucker Carlson, which totally shows his dishonesty and unawareness of the actual political forces that shape the perception of reality in the West.
He says things like the elites and the ruling class of America, they don't care about the average Joes. But factually, like literally, Tucker Carlson is a millionaire and he has his own TV show and he comes from a very, very wealthy family. He is the elites. He is the ruling class. For all those saying that conservatism is the new counterculture and the new punk rock, it's just not on the money, because counterculture has always been about resisting or avoiding domination, not being part of domination's backlash.
Yes, and this is why I'm not on the cultural left. I'm sorry, I'm not into getting dominated by the fucking ruling elite. But let's pause for a fucking moment and reassess the ridiculous assertion that this lying fuck has just made. Apparently, the elite is really right-wing. What is even elite according to you, or even the ruling class? Here's the definition of the ruling class from Wikipedia that I brought up, which says that the ruling class is the social class of a given society that decides upon and sets that society's political agenda. Now ask yourself the following: what agenda does the right decide and enforces upon the society? Is it 5% less immigration? Is it maybe cutting down taxes? Well, that's a big one for sure. Maybe global warming denial? Is it making abortion just a topic of discussion? Can you name more? I surely can't. Those seem to be the only agendas that are settled by the right and are somewhat noticeable, but they are incredibly small and insignificant if we were to compare it with the leftist agendas, as well as their monopoly on popular culture that allows them to shape society. The left has actual power while the right lacks it. Here's a census of America's professors by political party. Would you say that academia is an important tool to serve the ruling class? I certainly will. The people on the top of intellectual hierarchy seem to be Democrats. Here's the estimated ratio of Democrats compared to Republicans in the film industry according to verdantlabs.com. Would you say that popular culture is an important tool to serve the ruling class? I certainly will. And more on that you can find if you watch my video that you can access via link down below. Here is a survey from Forbes of America's ultra-rich billionaires with their voting preferences. Would you say that the rich would back other elites and continue to support the rule of the dominant class? I certainly will, and quite ironically, the rich back the ideology that is not even working in their financial interests, which is really telling that for them manufacturing popular culture is more important than their own wealth. And what about the media? Who are they supporting? Here's the analysis of media's coverage of BLM, for example. And what about the tech giants? Go ahead and type the word white men or white women and look at the results that you will get, and I assure you, if the ruling class was to be conservative or run by the people who like communities of strength, you would not see any racist articles made about white people that you can see now on your screen. In fact, you would see quite the opposite, that is, articles of empowerment of those selected demographics. Conservatives indeed happen to be the counterculture because they have been outnumbered and ostracized by the mainstream culture to the point of marginalization. They are not in the positions of power, no, they are particularly influential. The loudest and the most influential noises come from the left, who at this point have a monopoly on culture. Here is how this cultural hegemony plays out on Asian Americans, according to Rob Henderson, and I quote: "While money and education are tickets to the middle class, prizing diversity is a requirement to join the upper class. It's part of what the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, one of my favorites, referred to as cultural capital: tastes, vocabulary, awareness, and mannerisms, which give social advantages to those higher in the social hierarchy. This is why there is a divide among Asian Americans about affirmative action. Asian immigrants are least likely to support it. Like many older Americans, they believe obtaining a good education is the path to upward mobility and think race-conscious policies are harmful. In contrast, younger native-born Asian Americans are 3 times more likely to support affirmative action. The sociologists Jennifer Lee and Van Tran have found in their research that Asian immigrants are least likely to support affirmative action. By contrast, Asians born in the US with parents who were also born here, the so-called later generation, are most likely to do so. These younger Americans have learned that social mobility involves an additional ingredient, adopting the social mores of the upper class. Social mobility affects political orientation too. In 1992, more than half of Asian Americans voted for Judge H.W. Bush, but in 2012 only 26% voted for Mitt Romney, a similar number as voted for Donald Trump, suggesting that this is a generational change rather than related to the personality of the current president. End of quote. And finally, I have a question. Would the elite or the ruling class want more people to adopt the popular opinions that would justify the current cultural hegemony of the ruling class? I certainly think so, and I think that I have demonstrated enough of proofs for one to conclude that the ruling class is indeed the people who subscribe to culturally leftist political ideology. Finally, at the end of the video, he made the point that I did not expect him to make, which is denouncing the perceived intersectional hierarchy of oppression that essentially works for leftists more as a power relation hierarchy, which I guess makes sense for him to denounce, because at the end of the day he is, unfortunately, a narcissistic straight white male who is also probably in the top white percent. Not to mention that it also works as an exclusionary force for the left, resulting in them not being able to recruit more disciples among certain demographics, while being highly appealing for others, which by the way runs contrary to his first point on vulnerabilities. With regards to the left winning, I do not want to be pessimistic here, but at least in the West they are controlling all major institutions and celebrities and other entities that produce narratives and culture. They work on conformity, social shame and social approval. I think it will be very hard for one to challenge all of those, and we could ever speak of rights resurgence only when all those institutions as well as popular culture is being challenged to the core. North America and Western Europe seems to be very pessimistic as of now, but let's not forget that we also have Russia, Eastern Europe and some parts of South America. As well as let's study what made Korea, China, Japan, Israel, Singapore and many other countries resist the forces that are shaping our society. I want to finish this video off by saying that everyone has vulnerabilities, including myself and people on the right. I consider it to be a strength to be open about one's vulnerabilities, but the difference here is that although the right tries to work on them, the left wants to embrace them, and that is a major problem I have with the left currently. To my dismay, I do see that in the West, the cultural left appeals more to weak people, and since natural selection is off the table at this point, those people will only increase in numbers, which would boost the left's disciples even more. But at the end of the day, the encouragement of weakness will not do anyone good in the long run. Our society will just get even worse than it already is, and a weak society is not a society in which I would prefer living in, as well as it's not the right kind of society to be at competition with stronger societies like China, for example.